Fellow Anguillians, my people, over the past weeks, the local airwaves have been inundated by persons expressing strong opposition to the implementation of the government's resolution plan for the National Bank of Anguilla and the Caribbean Commercial Bank. This plan was implemented after a long period of uncertainty that threatened the stability of Anguilla's indigenous banking sector and indeed the Anguillan economy as a whole. Our Anguilla United Front government had made it an important campaign promise that we would bring a swift resolution to this situation within a year of coming into office. The process was very complex, but despite what I considered unacceptable delay, we were able to achieve that objective within a day of the anniversary of our ascendance to office on April 23, 2015. On July 17, 2015, I delivered an address to the nation entitled, and I quote, "A Simple Explanation of Banks and Regulators," unquote. In that address, I made a number of commitments to the people of Anguilla on behalf of our government. Through the entire process, we have focused our attention on realizing those commitments in arriving at a just and equitable resolution process. The commitments were as follows. 1. Ensure that all customer deposits are protected. 2. Ensure that Anguilla retains the majority shareholdings in the indigenous banking sector. 3. That our government do what is required to ensure that the underlying economic situation on the island is improved so as to create more jobs, business opportunities, investment, and training. 4. Enact laws that are fit for the purpose of effecting and giving effect to a resolution in the interests of the people of Anguilla. And finally, to ensure that the jobs and benefits for the staff of our indigenous banks are protected for the long term. We, as your government, believe that despite the negative expressions of a few persons and groups within the community, our resolution plan has delivered those noble objectives that I outlined way back in July last year. The main opposition to the process in the early stages was driven by persons who seemed more concerned about their shares in the bank and how their loan obligations to the bank would be handled, rather than in a resolution of the banks that guarantee the protection of customer deposits and the stability of the wider economy. In other words, these oppositionists mention very little about the customer deposits. What is very interesting today is that a number of those very persons seem to be more concerned about offshore depositors than about the protection of local depositors in the parent banks. I need to make the very clear distinction that unlike these domestic banks, NBA and CCB, the offshore banks are not regulated by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, but rather by the Financial Services Commission. However, let me also make it very clear that the government of Anguilla has every intention to find a way to assist the offshore banks. However, it must be a coordinated effort that recognizes the priority ranking that has been established by law and legislation. This is the point where everyone needs to be cooperative so as to secure the best interests of all concerned. Unfortunately, this matter has now become the subject of a disputed claim, a situation that places it in the hands of third parties, and as a consequence, may be prejudiced by any comments that I may wish to make on the matter at this time. I must also express surprise that after the several leaders of the protest have been making a number of irresponsible statements about the offshore subsidiaries on their radio programs, they have wisely refrained from putting any such comments in the letter that was handed from Mrs. Agnes Fleming Payne yesterday. I commend them for realizing that to do otherwise would expose their earlier callous politicization of this issue. And while I'm on this matter, let me point out that the letter which I received during the protest march was addressed and signed as coming from Mrs. Agnes Fleming Payne and very articulately delivered by teacher Janice Hodge. However, as far as my colleagues and I are concerned, while the letter makes a number of sweeping inaccurate statements and false allegations, there is no smoking gun. Nothing in the letter explains why they believe that neither the process nor the implementation of the process serve the best interests of the people of Anguilla and the greater good. Neither does it offer any good reason why they believe that a march to my office will do anything more than suggest to the world community that there is an unstable situation in Anguilla. To put it bluntly, one would get the impression that it is all about politics. There are absolutely no solutions that were offered. Neither is there any recognition of the fact that at this late stage, when the implementation has been executed and in place, any reversal of the resolution without a viable alternative could spell disaster for this island that they claim to cherish so dearly. Once again, some of the leaders who wanted to reverse the ballot of the elections of April 2015 by riot in October and November last year are now spreading fear within the community, leading to the belief that this resolution will cause persons to lose their land and their money in the bank. Let me point out some realities to some concerned Anguillians who have been told that the Asset Management Corporation, the AMC, can just up and take your property under this resolution. 1. If you borrow money from the bank and you have not paid for many years, and there is no conceivable way that you will ever be able to fulfill those obligations in the future, that is, pay the bank can then carry out the agreement it made with you and that you signed to give up your property if you cannot pay. It would be unfair to the people who deposited their hard-earned money in the bank for you to take their money and keep your property as well. And as we say in Anguilla, get off scotch-free. But neither the AMC nor the bank can up and take your land just so. 2. Many of the persons who are telling you that the Asset Management Corporation, the AMC, will take your property have not paid their loans, and large loans at that, for more than 5 years. What gives such a person the right to determine how the bank or the AMC should get the depositor's money back? I repeat, neither the AMC nor the bank can up and take your land just so. 3. Many persons are telling you that the Asset Management Corporation is set up for Kittitions and other Caribbean islands to buy Anguillan property. Well, they can buy Anguillan property right now if it is up for sale, especially if it is up for sale by the banks and no Anguillan buyer is stepping forward. My people, such statements are simply made to instill fear. Ask yourself the question, how much land has the Europeans, the Americans, and the Chinese bought up in recent times? Would you prefer to sell to nationals far removed from your culture than to your own Caribbean brothers and sisters? This is plain irrational fear-mongering for callous political purposes, and in many cases, from intellectually dishonest persons. Let me repeat, neither the AMC nor the bank can up and take your land just so. 4. A number of the protest leaders have told you that they have had solutions from foreign investors who are ready to put money in the banks. Ask yourself the question, are they putting money in the banks because they love Anguilla or because they want to own the banks at a cheap rate and make a killing? Don't you believe that this resolution that ensures that our banks are 100% owned by Anguilla is the best way forward? Don't let them fool you. No private investor will jump up and put money in a failed bank just so. 5. A good question to ask some of these large borrowers who have non-performing loans and want to convince you that they have investors who are prepared to pump money into the banks is this: why don't you get them to pay off your loan? The truth is, no private investor is going to jump up and give anybody money just so. But there are other totally nonsensical things that some of these very protest leaders have been spouting on the airwaves just to further their own personal and political agenda. Let me wise you up to a few of them as follows. A number of these very leaders of the protests are encouraging Anguillians to take their money off the new bank and save Anguilla. How can you save Anguilla? By destroying an Anguillian-owned bank with the hope that such persons can find a way to get their shares back. When you destroy the indigenous banks, who will build them back? B. They're also telling employees not to go to work because the government will not pay their compensation. One protester loudmouth declared, and I quote, "Don't worry, don't go to work, we will take care of you," unquote. Let me ask you the question. When you lose your job, will he get you another one when he claims not to have one himself? Unquote. C. One protest leader who is on every radio station every day is telling the audience that the banks did not fail because of the non-performing loans, but rather because of excessive administrative expenditure or spending. How intellectually honest can someone who himself has non-performing loans and someone who knows that 4 family entities alone have over $160 million in non-performing loans make such an outrageous statement like that? Can you really trust such persons who can make such shameless comments? D. There's also another scare tactic being put out, that the government is planning to amalgamate the new bank with the St. Kitts, Nevis and Anguilla National Bank. The idea here being to appeal to the sensitive historical emotions associated with the Anguilla Revolution. To further this conspiracy, one of the loudmouth protesters is trying to develop a Trump-like birther issue by suggesting that I was born in St. Kitts. As desperate a strategy as that is, I see no value in making him wise to what he already knows. But I must point to the reality of the strategy of lies and misleading statements for purely personal and political motive. Will the lies, half-truths, and misinformation ever stop? But I would not wish to paint all the protesters or spectators at the march yesterday with the same broad brush. They were, for the most part, not all part of the same stage performance. I saw persons who were genuinely confused. I saw persons who were along for the politics, die-hard oppositionists, I call them. I saw persons who were hoping that this march might really change their situation. I saw persons who were just plain haters. I saw persons who were just following the leader. And I saw persons who were hopeful that this action could bring down the government. And after the letter was read, I noticed the faces of a number of persons who seemed to be asking themselves the question, and I quote, "What am I really doing here?" But let me respond very briefly to the 4 questions raised in the petition. To the first request, I must respond that I am not certain as to the banking report being referenced. If it is the internal ECCB report that was done on both banks, Because of the confidential and proprietary nature of the information, I am absolutely not expected to circulate that for public scrutiny. If, on the other hand, it is the so-called forensic audit by Grant Thornton, an official redacted version has already been circulated. With regards to the objection to the passage of the legislation, let me state categorically that none of the legislation passed in the House of Assembly while I have been leader of government business have been passed in one sitting of the House. As far as public consultation is concerned, most of the legislation was circulated before we arrived in office and agreed by the past Chief Minister. It is also ridiculous to demand that legislation that is already in force should now be suspended for public consultation. If the protest leaders believe that any piece of legislation needs to be amended, there is a process to achieve this. The banking resolution has already been implemented. The horse is already out of the stable. It is ridiculous to now demand its suspension without advancing any credible or substantive reason for doing so. It is ludicrous to suggest that there should be some form of referendum to select an option for the resolution of the banks. However, the only other option available to government of Angola was liquidation, given the fact, of course, that under the past Chief Minister it was agreed in the Monetary Council that there should be a full guarantee of all customer deposits. Liquidation means that if you have $1 in the bank, you may get 50 cents or less. The resolution of banks is not a political exercise. It is a technical and scientific one, and delay in that process could spell disaster. In short, the demands being put forward by the group which Mrs. Agnes Fleming Plain coordinated and teacher Janice Hodge dictated cannot be given any serious consideration. It calls for suspension and objection, but no solution or suggestion. It makes a mockery of a serious process undertaken by this government for the stabilization of an indigenous banking sector that, as you will recall, was allowed to languish in a state of uncertainty under the previous administration for more than 20 months. May I therefore reasonably conclude that this whole march was designed by its leaders to destabilize Angola with the hope of bringing down the duly elected government. But perhaps the greatest blasphemy of all is the stated opinion by the leaders of the protests that their spurious objection to the resolution of the banks should lead to the boycotting of Angola Day, the most patriotic day on the national calendar, should not be the subject of such frivolous political pandering. I would go so far as to assert that anyone who would stoop so low as to make such a comment is very unpatriotic indeed. Anguilla Day should be a day for healing, not for salting wounds. But let me state here, the Angola United Front government will not be distracted by such pathetic politicking. The election is over. You lost miserably. Despite the fact that our party was in opposition when the takeover of the banks occurred, we did not hold any angry protests on so delicate and sensitive an issue. We presented our concerns under our own identity with reasoned arguments. That is what a responsible opposition does. Let me also state that the Angola United Government team is formally united under my leadership. We are a team, and we intend to exercise our mandate as a team for the next 4 years. No headless protests can deter us. We will continue to work for the greater good. The task before us now, that the banking resolution is in place, is to grow the economy by creating jobs, business opportunities, investment, and training. We have set ourselves to that task assiduously with a number of public and private sector projects in various stages of implementation, as well as a hard-working team of Anguillan public servants behind us and before us. We have work to do. We will not spend or waste our time responding to every single ploy designed to divert attention away from the real issues and our mission to fulfill the vision to build a nation proud, strong, and free. God bless all of us, and may God bless Anguilla. I thank you so much for listening.